Thank you. So, yay. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today on Sunday, March the 13th. It's one day before the White Day here in Japan, 2 days after, the anniversary of the great East Japan earthquake, and of course, other memorable dates in history as well. Today, again, we've got Timothy Langley, the Chief Executive Officer of Langley Esquire, an agency that deals in public affairs here in Tokyo. So, if you're ever lost for advice or you need somebody to help you get into the Japanese market or do your public affairs here, please do contact Timothy Langley and his team. They have been working here for more than 20 years. Of course, Timothy Langley has 40 years collectively in Japan, so he's well versed in everything Japanese. But today we're going to talk about what happened. Right, what happened in Japanese politics during the past 1 week. And like last week, Timothy is reporting from the beautiful harbor of Katsuyama. Timothy, without any further ado, I'm giving the floor to you. So here we go.
Thank you very much, Maya, and thank you for the very nice plug for me and my company. Yes, we do public affairs. If you enjoy, finding out about Japanese public affairs, what's going on in Japanese politics, we have a monthly report that we produce in the company. It's called Policy Radar. If you write to my company, you can get on the mailing list there. It's a little bit more detailed than the description that we give every Sunday at 8:30 here. So please sign in if you'd like to get a more regular feed on a text that you can share with your friends and copy and paste. No problems there with us. So once again, thank you very much for joining us on our weekly policy update on what's going on in Japanese politics. There's a lot going on. As usual, let me begin by talking about what we talked about last week, so it falls into a really good perspective on what we're going to talk about this week. And by the way, we're live streaming now on LinkedIn, and at the same time through Maya's microphone, because I can't get on Clubhouse right now into Clubhouse. I'll give this briefing and then go immediately over to Clubhouse, and we'll stop live streaming on LinkedIn. Last week, we started off with Mr. Kishida, the Prime Minister of Japan. He was in a bit of a pickle because his popularity is beginning to go down. He's around 45%, and he has a couple of issues going on there. There's a gerrymandering issue that the Japanese government is obliged to perform, as insisted upon by the Japanese Supreme Court, to address disparities in voting. So there are 10 districts that the population has fallen, but they still remain keeping the same number of members of the lower house members. And there are 10 that have expanded the metropolitan areas of Osaka, Fukuoka, Tokyo. And although the population has increased, the number of seats in these districts has not increased. That's been identified by the Japanese Supreme Court as unconstitutional, or actually, as they said, approaching unconstitutionality. They didn't go out and say it was unconstitutional. They kind of use softer words, but it is something they have to do. The Prime Minister is honor bound to do something about that this year. They have a committee that's supposed to report to him. And there's a little bit of nervousness here because many of the people in the LDP, about 126 of them, are affected. If this gerrymandering occurs, they want to kick the ball down the road. So that's a big issue. It was a big issue last week. We talked about that. There's no new developments this week to talk about, but it is something that is coming up. It will stay in the background. The report to the Secretary General will include recommendations. And so there's related maneuvering that's going on that we are talking about this week. So it's important to keep this in mind too. We talked about immigration and the relaxing of restrictions last week. There was discussion of going from the daily limit of 5,000 to 7,000. It received a lot of criticism there. There are a lot of the business K-Diamond Association is pushing for more robust triggering of the economy. The prime minister is holding back a little bit because his poll numbers tell him the reason for his decline is because of his softness on treating COVID restrictions, and he needs to be a little bit harder. He's announced that he wants to have 1 million booster shots a day as soon as possible, and he reached that this last week. I'm going to be talking a little bit about that, but his numbers continue to fall because of his tepid response to a lot of international things and things that are going on in the economy here. And he's got, Mr. Abe, who is really angling more and more aggressively against his better interests. Mr. Abe, as you know, has the largest political faction within the LDP, and Mr. Kishida is number 3 or number 4. And so he has to have a coalition of other like-minded factions to kind of shore up his policy statements. So that battle continues to go on, and there's something to talk about that a little bit more this week. So the Abe-Kishida dynamic is always a little bit in flux, and there's just a little bit of animosity under the table. We need to keep an eye on that because it's telling of what's going to happen in the upper house elections coming in July. We talked about COVID and the quasi-emergency that is implemented by the Japanese government and the relaxation of that. That is going into effect today. 18 prefectures will remain, but the other prefectures go off their restrictions today. We talked about Greg Kelly. You might remember Greg Kelly. He was the general counsel who was arrested with Carlos Ghosn, who was the well-known president of Nissan Motor Company here. He was released. He was convicted, but released. And there was a big picture in the newspaper with him getting his passport delivered by Rahm Emanuel, the new ambassador from the United States to Japan. So Greg Kelly is now in the United States and hopefully writing his memoirs about the ordeal he went through. It's pretty big news 2 weeks ago. South Korea was in an election process. They elected their new president this week on the 10th. North Korea fired a missile on the day that we were having our last briefing. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on with North Korea. And the non-nuclear proliferation agreement that Japan has signed is beginning to show a little bit of weakness or flexibility. There are several people in the Japanese parliament who are proposing that Japan distance itself a little bit from the policies of not hosting, not holding, and not generating or creating nuclear weapons. And that issue is becoming a little bit softer now because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. There are certain forces within the parliament, mostly LDP, who want to take another look at that. As you might recall, one of the reasons why Ukraine was available to be invaded was because it did give up its nuclear stockpile in exchange for neutrality and not being threatened. So see how far that got them. So that was what we talked about last week. This week, the whole world is different. Everything changes in a week, and particularly in Japanese politics. Although a lot of people say, why don't things happen more rapidly? But in perspective, they change all the time. It's just that, things do happen here a little bit more slowly than one would hope. So first off the bat, the election in South Korea, the opposition party won the election. They won by a narrow margin. There was 48% versus 47% voting. There were 3 candidates. The spoiler was the third candidate who received 2% of the vote that would have gone to the ruling party candidate. She took 2.3%, and the margin between the first place and the second place was 0.7%. So the 2% that she took definitely crushed the leading the government candidate for prime minister or for president, and the opposition party, the people. What's his party? It's the People's Power Party. And he was always seen as somebody who was more amicable towards Japan. One of the problems that the United States has with Japan is that it hasn't been able to accommodate a better relationship with South Korea. And this is a real bone of contention because what we've got going in China and the potential for Taiwan incursions there, and just the overflights and the incursions. There was a Soviet helicopter that overflew Japanese airspace this time last week. So there's a lot going on, and it's important to have a nice tight coalition. You know, Quad is about building that coalition. It is not as robust. It's not as it's not really coming together because of the four parties. India is a little bit standing on the fence, but between Japan and Korea, that is an alliance that should be much more robust. But because of the pre-war period, the colonization between of Japan, of Korea by Japan from 1910 to 1945, still has lots of historical issues that remain unresolved as far as the South Koreans are concerned. As far as the Japanese are concerned, this was all resolved irrevocably about 12 years ago, and the Japanese want to stay with that. So somewhat of a hard line from the LDP. You might remember Sado Island was up for UNESCO. Mr. Kishida wanted to back off from pushing that through because it would agitate Japan-South Korea relations. The Abe faction pushed very hard. They said there's no reason for us to be hesitant about this. Sado Island is a historical site. The gold mine was the height of technology when it was in its heyday, and it deserves to be recognized by UNESCO. He won that fight, which again reflects a little bit of the dynamics between what's going on in Japanese politics with Mr. Abe's faction and the other factions that are aligned with Mr. Kishida. So there's a lot going on there. So I think we can look forward to better relations between Japan and South Korea. That is on the board. The candidate who won, Mr. Jung, has stated that he will make his first trip to the United States, and on the return stop in Japan, those will be his first 2 foreign trips once he becomes president. Japan has decided that 2 shots and a booster is not quite enough. We need yet another one. The Mr. Ogi, the advisor to the Prime Minister, the chairman of the Medical Association for COVID reaction, the advisor to the Prime Minister, has announced that it looks like we're going to have a 4th shot, probably in midsummer. That is coming out today or maybe Friday. It is not set in stone, but it is going to be making a little bit of headway here, and it looks like many people who are following this says that there is no end to COVID. It's going to be with us forever, and we just need to be able to deal with it, and booster shots will be a part of that. There has been a related development. There is a Japanese pharmaceutical company that has come up with a COVID injection. It is pushing it through. Shionogi Research has come up with this COVID vaccine. It is pushing it through the Ministry of Health. It will probably get accepted because right now, for all of the inoculations that have been made, those are going to Pfizer and to Moderna. The Japanese desperately want to keep that money in Japan, keep that research, keep that flow of technology here in Japan. And COVID came so quickly. The Japanese Medical Association, the Japanese medical industry here was a little bit caught off guard because they don't have all the technology the United States has in developing these kinds of vaccines, and also the pandemic reaction. So it looks like this Japanese locally manufactured product will be hitting the shelves probably in the fall. So this is a big deal for Japan because, as you know, Japan likes to produce product here. It doesn't like to import to the degree it can so that it keeps its reserves here. And it's not sending out valuable cash to purchase products. Maya, in her opening, was talking about some of the things that have happened in Japanese history that are rather critical, important in this month of the year. And the most pertinent for our purposes this week was the anniversary of 3/11, the triple disaster. It was 11 years ago. The Prime Minister was up at Miyagi, made a policy statement, made a speech up there. 3/11, the after effects are still with us. The nuclear reactor in Fukushima has amassed just tons and tons of radioactive waste and water for cooling. There is a plan to release that water into the sea. It's created a lot of consternation among the people within Fukushima, but also globally as well, especially our Asian neighbors. You might remember last week we talked about the relaxation of fruits and vegetables going from Fukushima and Miyagi to other areas as a kind of a tit for tat for the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement that is being decided now. Different areas, different countries are aligning for that, even China and other countries. So the Japanese were able to extract, relaxations on food imports from these prefectures, and the news or the announcement, it was made several months ago as a test balloon, but it is inevitable that they need to do something with the waste product, and they will be dumping it into the sea. So once again, the ability of these three highly affected prefectures to begin exporting or to begin producing or to begin fishing even is really under question, and it affects the economy. It affects that region. So there's a lot of issues on policy going on there. It's something to keep your eye on. We'll be reporting on that as much as we can. The entry cap and the relaxation of tourists coming in, not tourists, but business people and students, is really on a full throttle now. The Prime Minister tried to stick to 5,000. He acquiesced and moved it up to 7,000, and it looks like that's going to be blown away very quickly with the restrictions in all of the prefectures falling today, except for 18. There'll be maybe another 2 weeks. They will be watching that. The numbers are kind of inching up. There's a little bit of flexibility there, but certainly the Prime Minister is talking about restarting the Go-To program, which helps people travel throughout Japan, get discounts for that. He didn't announce a date for that, but he did say that it is coming soon. So the doors are opening, and you can expect, first of all, the business people and the teachers, the students coming in now. It's already happening, but probably within the next 2 months, relaxation for tourists. In the meantime, you've got what's going on in Ukraine and the refugee situation there. The Japanese government and the Tokyo metropolitan government is also acting in concert to offer homes and places to live for these refugees. They're calling them refugees. They'll probably be long-term, maybe even permanent residents, but they are opening the doors there, just like a lot of other countries. It's somewhat strange, somewhat out of context for the Japanese government. It accepts very few refugees. It grants very few amnesties, and this is something that they've reacted to very quickly. It looks like 500 homes will be offered of 100 right now for free for refugees coming in. That's homes for 100 families and expandable up to 700. That's in Tokyo alone. Osaka, Fukuoka are also considering that. The Ukrainian embassy is really burning the midnight oil on getting a lot of these things done. We can anticipate and expect a lot of people coming in from Ukraine in the next couple of months. The dynamic between Russia and China, and the dynamic between China and Japan is in constant flux. The Chinese and the Russians, they seem to be bound at the hip during the Olympics, and just prior to the invasion by Russia of Ukraine, it looks like since the world has reacted so strongly against Putin, the Chinese are considering their stance. Then maybe they were a little bit too hasty to, take a look the other way, so that Russia could do what it's doing right now. At the same time, China is beginning to consider, their own economy, their own situation there, and their relationship with Japan. So there are overtures that are beginning now. So the dynamics are changing. It's changing very quickly. You might remember that China and Russia had a flotilla of warships, both of them sailing through the Japan Sea in a show of force and a show of cooperation. That caused a lot of consternation here at the Ministry of Defense, and as well with the United States, flexing their muscles there. There's a lot of activity going on in Kamchatka, in the Sakhalin area, in the 4 disputed islands. It puts Mr. Abe at a bit of a disadvantage because he spent a lot of time developing a relationship with Vladimir Putin. He had him at the house. He gave him a dog. He met with him 26 times during his tenure as prime minister. That looks to have fallen by the wayside, even though he's still painted as a kind of a Russian lover. As his profile on the diplomatic scene continues to get bigger and bigger, he's fighting against, the prime minister and Mr. Hayashi, who is the prime minister's kind of number 2 in his political faction, who is the foreign minister. He made some statements, Mr. Hayashi, 2 weeks ago that received a lot of criticism from Mr. Abe, who said something to the effect, we should check the credentials of people who are practicing foreign affairs at the ministry level, speaking specifically about Mr. Hayashi. So that's a little barred there. Today, Mr. Abe is in Malaysia for the 65th anniversary of diplomatic relations with that country. So he continues to expand his profile on the global scene. He's not going anywhere quickly. He's going to stay with us. And what's going to happen in the upper house election is everybody's main focus. It's only a couple of months away, and the fight between Mr. Kishida and Mr. Abe will come to the fore. Also, what the LDP decides to do with this distribution of votes and the gerrymandering rules. I think what they're going to do is they're going to kick the ball down the road. They're going to decide to do it in 3 or 4 years. They're not going to do it right now. And even if they did it right now, the committee that is advising the prime minister's office and thus the rest of the parliament to vote on this is required to do that in April. It's got a deadline for reporting to the prime minister, action steps to be taken. I believe even if it passed then, it wouldn't go into effect until the next election of the lower house, which isn't expected for another 3.5 years, unless, of course, something happens with Mr. Kishida, he loses confidence, or he closes down the house. Anything's a game there. So that's something that we're watching very closely, and we'll continue to report on that with you. There are a couple of other items I'd like to bring to your attention. North Korea tested 2 rockets within 2 weeks of our last briefing. Their second one was fired last Sunday. The United States, the CIA has reported that this is a test for ballistic missiles, ICBM, but it is also a practice run for a surveillance satellite that they will hoist above geocentrically above this region here. So they're moving in a very tight lockstep to produce, really threatening nuclear capabilities. It has caused a lot of concern, and that's once again the election of the South Korean president and the relations between Japan and South Korea. That's why it's so vitally important to get these things repaired as quickly as possible. You can expect that there will be some other tests that are being held. The United States has issued more sanctions on North Korea, and that always tends to just escalate the issue. The Prime Minister's senior advisor on economic policy has advised that the Prime Minister needs to quickly issue another stimulus package. Can you believe that? Mr. Kishida, he became Prime Minister immediately off, initiated a tremendous stimulus package because of COVID. And that was before we got really hammered with the Omicron virus. So there was just a tremendous amount. I mean, it was one of the largest stimulus packages that Japan has ever issued. And now the senior advisor for economic reform is advising another one to be in the 10 trillion yen region for supplementing spending. So what they're trying to do is get Japanese people to spend. This is really a difficult challenge for them because, number one, commodity prices are rising. You're seeing it every day. 2-3 weeks ago, McDonald's cut down. You know, you couldn't have anything but the large fries because they didn't have enough potatoes. You're finding that now with wheat and with gasoline. Gasoline has caused a bit of a problem for Mr. Kishida. They have price controls issued on gasoline. When it reaches a certain amount of price control comes in, the Japanese government pays the supplement for that, and the consumer pays just the highest fee that you would be paying, even though the gasoline cost might be higher than that. So there's a lot of lobbying going on. The Kokumin, the party of, what's it called in English? Kokuminto, the party of the people, is really cozying up to Jiminto in anticipation of the upper house election. So there's a little bit of horse trading that's already going on now. They went to the LDP. They had a meeting there. They talked about childcare. They talked about tax relief. They talked about housing. They talked about a couple of things as their champion policy issues. And the LDP accepted those to be associated with this political party. So they're in the opposition, but they're cozying up to the LDP. The LDP, apparently the trade-off was, we are going to support those issues that you have just identified to us, and they will be affiliated with you, your party. You are the champion of that. And what we want in return is, there are a couple of election districts that are important to you. We're going to give those to you. We're not going to run a candidate in those election districts. There are about 4 of them that this political party really doesn't want to lose. So the LDP apparently has agreed to give them that. But on the 36 others that they don't have a candidate in, the people who are belonging to their particular party will vote for the LDP. It's rather complicated, but it's a trade-off that's happening, and it's being followed and reported, because right now it's the LDP and Komeito who are the coalition parties who dominate Japanese politics. Komeito is not all that happy with the LDP. There's a little bit of cracks in the facade, and the LDP is looking for alternative people to hold hands with. So it's really a dynamic that we'll see the full fruition of it as we approach the upper house elections. Let me see where I am now. You remember, in terms of Japanese politics, the LDP is a house of several factions. The number 2 faction is run by Mr. Aso. He lost 4 members last week. We reported on that. They've started a group. They haven't really gone into another faction, but the fight now is for who's going to get those 4 members. Mr. Abe wants them, and Mr. Kishida wants them. So there's a little bit of horse trading that's going on there. It looks like potentially Mr. Abe will get 2 of them, and Mr. Kishida's faction will get 2 of them. There's always just a tremendous fight for even just one more person to join a faction. It's really a difficult thing to lose somebody, and it's a big deal to get 1 or 2 more, because the distinction and the difference between the number 2 and number 3 political factions is razor thin, and those numbers mean something. When there is a change of government, distribution of cabinet seats and also vice cabinet and all the policy positions are distributed according to that weight. So it's extremely important. And defections and picking up new independent members who were independent is something that is watched very carefully. Just to wrap up, there are a couple of bills that are going into the Diet now that are pretty important, that I think people will see the evidence of in quick order. So the first one is a bill to allow electric scooters on the roads. You don't need a driver's license to use them. You have to be 16 years or older to ride them. But you've seen them on the streets now. They haven't been typically legal in some jurisdictions, in some prefectures. They don't really hammer them too hard. In other prefectures, they hammer them really hard. The National Police Agency doesn't recognize them. So this bill would recognize these electric scooters to be on the road, and this will be coming in this year. So there is a lot of flexibility when the consumers really voice their concerns for that. In the same bill, they're also going to allow for autonomous driverless vehicles. That's a level 4 certification. It's a big deal here because what you really want is buses and trucks, the trucks that are driving in and bringing in foodstuffs and taking product, to the shipping. You'd like to see that to be autonomous. So we're on the way there. Even though Toyota makes cars that you take a nap while you're driving, it's not legal here in Japan, even though they have the capabilities. So this process of creating laws and bills and regulations to allow for that is happening right now. It will allow for delivery vehicles and also for picking up and delivering elderly people in depopulated areas. So that's the main purpose. It's probably something that will be piggybacked on by buses and trucks. Probably in 2023, it's 2022 right now, 2023, it's just next year. I think you're going to see a lot of movement there because the demand is very high. The number of people who are bus drivers, truck drivers, the depopulation of Japan in general, it's just, something needs to give, and it looks like that will be in technology. There are a couple of other things. There were stock manipulation by SMBC Nikko that was reported. It's a pretty big deal, stock manipulation. Unfortunately, it was a couple of a team, 2 of which were foreign nationals that were implicated in that. The investigation is ongoing now. A couple of arrests have been made. It's a pretty big deal. And then Hino, on the other side, Hino builds trucks and buses, you might know. They ship all over the world. They just admitted that for years they've been kind of goosing the emissions data that they've been submitting to the Japanese government, the governments elsewhere, for qualification to receive subsidies and that sort of thing. It's never nice when it happens, when you hear about it, and it's also doubly hard when you hear about it from companies that are one of the best in the world. Toyota got hammered a couple of years ago as well. So it's something to watch. It's not indicative of a collapse of the corporate culture here, but it is something that it's interesting to us, and what happens with the public prosecutors and how people get hammered and how they get hit and arrested and what the newspapers does to these people. It's always interesting to watch what those distinctions that are made. So with that, Maya, I'd like to turn it back over to you. Maybe go back to Clubhouse, finish this briefing and take questions.
Yes, thank you very much for the briefing, and we're going to move to Clubhouse now. Yes. So I actually hope that I would see a little bit more smiles for you today, but hopefully next time with, well, it will happen. So thank you very much, really. Yeah, that's really nice. Okay. So thank you very much for the briefing. Thank you for preparing for it. Now, could you please log into Clubhouse so that people will not be baffled why your voice sounds through my microphone there? So, well, I'm going to stop the live streaming, right? And I'll see you on the other side then.
Okay, I'll
Thank
go.
you.
I'll go over to Clubhouse now. Thanks, Maya.
Yes, thank you. See you on the other side.